The heavy velvet curtains of the grand hall swirled as the doors crashed open. But the real storm wasn't the woman shouting at the entrance. It was the sudden, cold metallic click echoing from right beside me. I turned my head just in time to see the woman I loved, the gentle maid I was about to make my wife, pulling a sleek black pistol from beneath her evening dress. Before I could even speak her name, the sharp crack of gunfire shattered the room. A burning fire bloomed in my chest. Darkness rushed in from the edges of my vision, and as the marble floor rose to meet me, my last thought was of the innocent smile she used to give me every night before bed. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into this wild journey of love, betrayal, and dark secrets, drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from today. The rain in Seoul always had a way of washing away everything except the truth. For 5 years, I thought I had built an impenetrable empire, but more importantly, I thought I had built a home. Standing at the edge of the glass floor in my top-floor office, I watched the city lights blur into streaks of yellow and red. Down at the docks, 3 of my primary cargo ships were currently sitting in harbor, impounded by local authorities after an anonymous tip detailing our exact transit coordinates. Only 3 people in the world had access to those coordinates. 2 of them were my most trusted lieutenants who had bled with me in the alleyways of Busan. The 3rd was the woman sleeping in my bed upstairs. She was from Lagos, a woman with a laugh that could light up the darkest corners of my cold world. When I brought her into my life, my men whispered that a king shouldn't marry someone outside our circle, let alone someone from another continent who knew nothing of our blood oaths. I didn't care. I loved her with a ferocity that terrified me. But love, as it turned out, was a dangerous blind spot. I didn't execute her. In our syndicate, treason meant a bullet to the back of the head and a nameless grave in the hills. My lieutenants demanded blood. They brought me the encrypted drive found in her personal laptop, showing direct transfers to our rivals in Incheon. They stood in my office, waiting for the order to put her down. Instead, I signed divorce papers, emptied a private bank account in her name, and bought her a one-way ticket out of the country. I let my men think I was foolish, but the truth was simple. I loved her too much to end her life, even if keeping her alive meant killing a part of myself. When she left, the silence in the penthouse became unbearable. The laughter that once filled the hallway vanished, replaced by an empty, haunting chill. The months that followed were a blur of excessive drinking and ruthless business decisions. I became harsher with my subordinates, cold to the point of cruelty, because feeling anything else felt like tearing open an unhealed wound. Every glass of scotch I poured was an attempt to drown the memory of her voice, but liquor only made the nights longer. Then there was the girl who cleared the empty glasses. She had joined the household staff 6 months before the divorce. A quiet girl with soft eyes who moved through the vast, empty mansion like a shadow. Unlike the guards who stood at attention with sweat on their brows whenever I walked past, she never looked at me with fear. When I stumbled into the grand hallway at 3 in the morning, reeking of expensive whiskey, she didn't shrink away. She would quietly take my heavy coat, slip my shoes off, and guide me to the sofa without a single word of judgment. Later that night, after a brutal meeting with the clan elders that left my head pounding, I sat on the dark balcony staring out at the rain. The air was crisp, but my skin felt hot from the alcohol. My mind was spinning, returning again and again to the gentle touch of the girl who had tucked a wool blanket over my shoulders the night before. I had spent months treating everyone around me like steel and glass, yet she treated me like a man who was simply tired, desperate for a glass of cold water to clear my throat, I stood up and walked down the grand spiral staircase toward the kitchen. The house was usually silent at this hour, lit only by the low ambient floor lights. But as I rounded the corner into the kitchen, the soft glow of the open refrigerator illuminated the room. She was standing there holding a small pitcher of water. She had taken off her usual crisp black and white maid uniform. In its place, she wore a simple silk nightgown that fell softly against her skin. The harsh lines of her daytime demeanor were completely gone, replaced by something breathtakingly delicate. She froze when she saw me, her breath catching slightly in her throat. I stopped a few feet away, the silence between us heavy and charged with something we had both been ignoring for weeks. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should I pour you some water?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked at her, realizing in that quiet moment that I hadn't thought about my ex-wife in days. All I could see was the girl standing in front of me, the one person who had stayed in the shadows of my grief without asking for anything in return. I walked over, closing the distance between us until I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. My hand moved on its own, reaching out to gently touch the edge of her gown before resting softly on her waist. She didn't pull back. Instead, she tilted her head up, looking directly into my eyes with an honesty that made my chest ache. "I don't want water," I murmured, my voice rough from the scotch. "Then what do you need?" she asked gently. "You," I said softly. "Just you." When I leaned down and kissed her, it wasn't the desperate, angry gesture I had feared it might be. It was soft at first, a slow hesitation, as if I was afraid she would break. But the moment her hands slid up my arms and brushed against the back of my neck, the restraint snapped. The kiss grew deeper, warmer. A quiet confession of all the nights we had spent in the same house pretending not to notice each other. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic speeches. Just the sound of our breathing and the steady rhythm of the rain outside. A few days later, the dark clouds that had hung over the house for nearly a year finally began to break. We didn't talk about the shift in our dynamic to the staff, but everything had changed. She still wore her modest clothes during the day, but when the guards cleared out and the evening quiet settled in, she sat beside me on the balcony, her hand resting comfortably inside mine. She taught me how to breathe again. When I was stressed about shipments, she would quietly sit on the rug near my desk, reading a book, simply offering her presence as an anchor. For the first time in my life, I felt like a man who didn't need to hold a gun to feel safe. 2 months later, I decided I was done hiding her in the shadows. I wanted everyone in our world to know that she was the one who held my heart. I ordered the grand ballroom downstairs to be decorated with white orchids and soft string lights. I invited the senior members of the syndicate, the local business partners, and everyone who needed to understand that my house was no longer a place of mourning. On the evening of the proposal, the ballroom was filled with low music and the gentle hum of conversation. She stood beside the tall floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a modest, elegant dress that matched the soft lighting of the room. She looked nervous, her hands folded tightly in front of her, but whenever her eyes met mine, a small, genuine smile crossed her lips. I walked to the center of the room, tapping a silver spoon against my glass to gather everyone's attention. The room fell quiet. "Many of you know what this house has been through over the past year," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You saw me fall apart and you saw this empire falter. But a house cannot stand on strength alone. It needs a heart." I turned toward her, extending my hand. She hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her cheeks flushing red under the warm chandeliers. She came into my life when I was at my worst. I continued softly, looking directly into her eyes. She didn't ask for power, she didn't ask for wealth, and she never asked me to be anyone other than who I am. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The room let out a collective soft gasp as I snapped it open, revealing a simple, perfect diamond band. I took her right hand, feeling a subtle tremble in her fingers. "Will you stay by my side?" I asked quietly, ignoring the crowd around us. "Not as someone who takes care of this house, but as the person who owns it with me." Her eyes shimmered with tears, and for a second, she looked as though she couldn't breathe. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Yes, I will." Before I could slip the ring onto her finger, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall slammed open with a deafening bang. The music stopped abruptly. The guests turned in shock as a tall woman stepped into the light, her designer dress slightly rumpled, her hair windblown from the storm outside. It was my ex-wife. She looked around the lavishly decorated room, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and desperation, before locking her gaze directly onto me. "Is this a joke?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the marble walls as she marched down the center aisle, ignoring the guards who moved to intercept her. I waved my security back, stepping in front of my fiancée to shield her. "You don't belong here," I said, my tone flat and icy. "I gave you your freedom. I gave you a life. Why are you here?" She stopped 10 feet away, pointing a trembling finger at the girl standing behind me. "Freedom? You threw me away like trash for her. A maid. A nobody who cleaned your floors while I helped you build this family. She stole everything that belonged to me. She manipulated you when you were weak. Nobody stole anything from you," I replied, stepping closer to her, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. "You stole it from yourself the moment you sold my shipping routes to the Incheon clan. I let you live because I loved you once. Don't mistake my mercy for weakness. Leave now before I forget the promise I made to myself the day you left." My ex-wife choked back a sob, looking at me with a mix of fury and regret. But as she opened her mouth to speak again, a sudden, sharp sound cut through her words. The crisp, heavy rustle of fabric from behind me. I started to turn around to tell my fiancé not to worry, but the motion stalled midway. My gentle, quiet maid, the woman who had held my hand on the balcony just hours ago, was standing with her feet braced apart. Her elegant dress was pulled up slightly on one side, revealing a dark leather holster strapped securely to her upper thigh. In her hand was a high-caliber pistol, already aimed with terrifying precision. Her face wasn't trembling anymore. The soft, gentle light in her eyes had vanished, replaced by an expression so cold, so entirely devoid of emotion, that it chilled me to the marrow. "What are you doing?" I managed to whisper, my mind struggling to bridge the gap between the woman I loved and the assassin standing before me. She didn't look at my ex-wife. Her dark eyes stayed fixed entirely on me. "I'm finishing the contract, sir," she said, her voice perfectly calm, completely devoid of the warmth I had grown to depend on. "The Incheon clan sends their regards." Before my brain could even process the words, a flash of fire erupted from the barrel. A heavy, crushing blow slammed into my chest, knocking the air straight out of my lungs. The grand chandelier above seemed to spin violently. The frantic screams of the guests and the frantic footsteps of my guards suddenly sounded like they were underwater. I hit the cold marble floor hard, my knees buckling beneath me. Blood pooled warmly against my white shirt as I stared up at the ceiling. The last thing I saw before the darkness completely consumed me was her standing over me, her face unreadable as she lowered the smoking gun. The morning light filtered through the harsh blinds of the hospital room, casting long, pale shadows across the white sheets. I blinked slowly, the dull, throbbing pain in my chest radiating with every ragged breath I took. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled my lungs, grounding me in the reality that I was still alive. As my vision gradually cleared, I looked around the silent room, taking in the steady hum of the heart monitor and the 4-drip attached to my arm. Sitting in the chair beside the bed was a face I never expected to see again. She sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes heavy with worry. "What are you doing here?" I rasped, my voice barely a shadow of its former strength. She leaned forward immediately, her expression softening as she placed a gentle, grounding hand on the edge of the mattress. "Please just calm down. You shouldn't be speaking yet. The doctors said the bullet barely missed your heart." I pulled back slightly, my jaw tightening despite the sudden spike of pain in my chest. "You were at the hall. You shouted at me. Why are you here now?" She let out a long, shaky breath, her dark eyes filled with a painful honesty that I hadn't seen in over a year. "I came to the ballroom that night to warn you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I knew how it looked when I left, but you never let me explain back then. Months ago, your opposition in Incheon approached me. They offered me a ridiculous amount of money and promised me safety if I gave them your shipping route coordinates. They thought because I was an outsider I would sell you out for a price." I stared at her, my mind racing as I processed her words. "I refused them," she continued, looking directly into my eyes without a single trace of hesitation. "I told them to go to hell. I may have had my issues, and our world was hard for me, but I would never betray you. I loved you too much to ever hand you over to men who wanted you dead. The information they used to frame me was leaked from inside your own household, not from my hands. I came back that night because I found out they had planted someone close to you. I wanted to save you." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The realization hit me like a physical force. The encrypted drive, the suspicious transfers, the ease with which I had let my grief blind me to the real traitor sitting right under my roof. Before I could process the weight of what she had just given me, she stood up slowly, smoothing down her coat. "I just needed you to know the truth," she whispered, her voice tinged with a quiet sadness. "I'm glad you're alive." Without waiting for me to respond, she turned and walked out of the door, her footsteps fading down the quiet hospital corridor. A few days later, the quiet of the hospital was shattered by a sudden, frantic shift in the air. Word reached my security detail that armed hitmen had been spotted lurking in the lower floor corridors. The opposition knew I had survived the bullet, and they were desperate to finish the job while I was still pinned to a bed. Against the frantic warnings of the head surgeon, I pulled the 4 lines from my arm, gritting my teeth as the fresh wound in my chest burned like liquid fire. My loyal bodyguards wrapped my torso tightly in heavy bandages, helping me down a private service elevator into an unmarked black sedan waiting in the alleyway. We drove deep into the outskirts of the city, arriving at a secluded, heavily fortified safe house I had built years ago for absolute emergencies. The hideout was hidden beneath an unassuming residential estate, equipped with high-grade security systems and a private medical suite. For weeks, my personal doctor tended to my wound in secret, changing my blood-soaked dressings while I forced myself to endure the blinding pain. As soon as I could stand without collapsing, I locked myself in the safe house control room. The recovery was slow, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Fueled by endless cups of bitter black coffee and sleepless nights staring at glowing monitors, I personally reassembled every piece of intelligence my syndicate possessed. I traced the money trails, decoded intercepted radio frequencies, and meticulously mapped out the hidden network that had placed the fake maid in my home. I didn't just find the mole. I uncovered the entire syndicate alliance that had conspired to tear my empire apart. A month later, when my wound had finally closed into a jagged pink scar across my ribs, I moved. My retaliation was swift, silent, and completely without mercy. I didn't give them a grand confrontation or a chance to bargain. Working through my loyal lieutenants, I dismantled their financial networks overnight. I seized their hidden bank accounts, burned their warehouses to the ground, and cut off their supply lines across the entire continent. Within 48 hours, the powerful families who had toasted to my downfall were stripped of everything they owned. Bankruptcy crushed their empires, and the leaders who had financed my assassination went into deep hiding, terrified to step out into the sunlight. They knew that anyone who dared to show their face in the city would meet an early, unforgiving grave. A few weeks later, the dust from the war had finally settled. My territory was secure, my authority absolute, and my empire stronger than it had ever been. To signal to the business world that order had been restored, I attended an exclusive, high-profile charity gala at a luxury hotel in central Seoul. The ballroom was filled with bright crystal lights, soft classical music, and affluent guests enjoying expensive wine. I stood near the marble bar in a tailored black suit, sipping my drink, when a familiar presence made the air in the room shift. I turned around and saw her. My ex-wife stood near the glass balcony doors, looking stunning in a simple, elegant dark gown. She looked poised, but when her eyes met mine across the room, the crowded space seemed to vanish entirely. I walked over to her, extending a hand toward the quiet terrace outside. "Walk with me?" I asked softly. She looked at me for a moment before placing her hand softly in mine. Later that night, we left the noisy gala behind and drove down to a secluded, serene waterfront park overlooking the quiet river. The night air was calm, crisp, and clear, with the vibrant lights of the city bridge reflecting smoothly across the dark water. We walked side by side along the stone path, the quiet rhythm of our footsteps filling the space between us. We talked for hours about everything: the years we had lost, the misunderstandings that had torn us apart, and the sheer survival it took for both of us to make it to this night. "I never stopped loving you," she admitted quietly, stopping near the edge of the railing to look at me, her brown eyes shining under the soft streetlights. "Even when you signed those papers, even when I was forced onto that plane, my heart never left this city. It never left you." The air between us grew heavy, thick with a desperate, unspoken tension that felt like it could be cut with a knife. All the pain, the regret, and the deep passion we had tried to bury for over a year rushed back to the surface at once. I didn't say a word. I reached out, grabbed her firmly by the waist, and pulled her body hard against mine. I leaned down and kissed her. There was nothing gentle about it. It was a fierce, possessive kiss born out of months of longing, grief, and survival. She didn't hesitate for a single second, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck and kissing me back with the exact same raw, burning intensity. Thank you so much for watching till the end. What do you think about the boss's ruthless revenge and that intense reunion? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story.